In today's rifle world, the industry keeps pushing the idea that only the latest and greatest is worth your money. But once you stretch shots past 200 yards and you start dealing with real-world conditions like wind drift, recoil management, and shooter discipline, well, you learn quick that newer doesn't always mean better. Out there, performance is king, not age, not marketing hype, and the same rule applies to cartridges. Plenty of rounds that solved these problems decades ago have been shoved aside in favor of what's trending. Today, we're dragging some of those classics back into the light. I've got 9 cartridges on the list. These are loads that earned their reputation the hard way, through trajectory, accuracy, terminal performance, and the confidence they give a hunter behind the trigger. They've dropped moose in the Scandinavian backcountry. They've hammered coyotes across wide ranch land. They've cleanly taken whitetails without ever needing the spotlight. Some run whisper quiet, with mild recoil and surgical accuracy. Others scream past 3,000 feet per second and group like match ammo. But they all share one thing. They perform a whole lot better than most modern shooters give them credit for. So let's get into it. The gun industry might have moved on, but seasoned hunters and serious riflemen never forgot about these cartridges. And once you hear the numbers, you'll understand exactly why they're still worth running. Number 1. 303 British. When Commonwealth soldiers came home after the war, they brought more than memories. They brought their Lee Enfields. That's how the 303 British made the jump from surplus military round to trusted hunting cartridge. Run a 150-grain soft point at about 2,690 feet per second, or a heavy 174-grain round nose at 2,460. Both deliver accuracy that'll surprise people who dismiss old war rifles. With proper bedding and setup, many of those Enfields print groups inside an inch and a half. Recoil isn't sharp. It's more of a firm push than a snap, which keeps shooters steady and makes range sessions a lot more enjoyable. That translates to tighter groups in the field. Load up a 174-grain soft point, and you're basically matching 308 Winchester energy out to about 150 yards. Go with a lighter 150-grain load, and it flies flatter than most folks expect. Handloaders running modern powders like Varget have no trouble printing 1-inch groups from old Parker Hale or BSA sporters you can still find in Canadian pawn shops. On Black Bear, a 180-grain spear hot core moving at 2,450 feet per second hits deep and doesn't blow apart meat. That moderate velocity actually helps traditional cup and core bullets hold together. Sure, the rimmed case design and loose chambers keep pressures low, so you'll never quite match modern 308 velocities. But inside 250 yards, it doesn't matter. Every November, hunters in Newfoundland are still dropping moose with iron-sighted Enfields, and those cock-on close bolts cycle fast, smooth, and ready for a quick follow-up. The 303 British may not win a beauty contest, but it's living proof that mild recoil, dependable rifles, and 1 to 1.25 MOA accuracy still put venison in the freezer. Number 2. 8mm Mauser, 7.92 by 57 mm. Germany's Warhorse cartridge carried them through 2 world wars, and it earned that status by flat-out working, whether in heavy elk timber or on driven boar hunts overseas. The classic 198-grain Spitzer leaves the muzzle around 2,600 feet per second, with nearly 3,000 foot-pounds of energy, and despite the reputation, recoil is not punishing. A full-size K98 service rifle kicks less than a lot of today's Magnums. Get the barrel bedded right, fix the throat and stabilize the stock, and even an old military Mauser or a modern CZ550 will hold 1 MOA. Handloaders love this cartridge. Run a 150-grain Nosler ballistic tip at 2,900 feet per second, and you've got a flat shooting 0 to 250 yards and a devastating medium game load. But the real sweet spot is with the heavies. Those deep penetrating bullets chew through moose shoulder or wild boar gristle like it's nothing. And with good retained velocity, you've still got a workable trajectory past 300 yards. In Europe, hunters still trust their Yugo M48s and Bernot VZ24s for brush drives. That round feeds slick through controlled feed Mauser actions and stays true even through light cover. Here in the States, it got overshadowed by the .30-06 Springfield. But when you watch an old surplus carbine print sub-MOA at 100 yards, you realize what you've been missing. Rebarrel a K98, mount solid glass, and suddenly you've got a 600-yard steel rifle that hangs with anything modern. The 7.92 by 57 proves again that smart case geometry, moderate pressures, and a deep stable of proven rifles is a recipe that lasts for generations. Number 3. 7mm Mauser 7x57mm Paul Mauser's design from 1892 is the definition of elegance with power. It gives you light recoil and still drops game way out past where people think it should. Load a modern 140-grain boat tail at 2,800 feet per second, and you're looking at wind and drop figures right in line with today's 6.5 Darlings. But here's the kicker. It carries more sectional density. That means it smashes through hide, bone, and muscle better than they do. Even century-old Spanish 1893 rifles will hold 1.5 MOA with irons. Throw a scope on a Ruger No. 1 or a sporterized Mauser, and groups shrink to under an inch. Hunters love this round for one reason: it works without beating you up. WDM Karamojo Bell famously used a Rigby .275, basically a 7x57mm, to drop elephants with 173 grain solids right through the brain. Closer to home, a 150 grain Nosler partition at 2,700 feet per second still keeps nearly 1,800 FPS at 300 yards. That's plenty of steam for elk lungs or mule deer ribs. The 7mm Mauser feeds flawlessly through controlled round bolt actions thanks to its smart shoulder and case taper. And whether you run a 22 or 24-inch barrel, powders burn consistent and velocities stay predictable. This cartridge is the father of a family. Neck it up to 30 and you get the .30-06. Neck it down to 25 and you've got the .257 Roberts. But the original stands on its own. When you hear the clang of steel at 400 yards from an old Chilean Mauser, it's a reminder. Accuracy, authority, and comfort can live in the same cartridge. And the 7x57mm has been proving it for over a century. Number 4. 280 Remington. In 1957, Remington took the .30-06 case, necked it down to 7mm, shoved the shoulder about 50 thousandths forward, and stumbled into one of the best balanced hunting cartridges ever made. Problem is, their marketing team never figured out how to explain it. Run a 140 grain AccuBond at 3,000 feet per second, and it shoots flatter than a .270 Winchester with less wind drift. Bump up to a 160 grain partition at 2,900, and you'll outpierce a .30-06 with the same weight bullet, thanks to superior sectional density. Rifles like the Remington 700 Mountain Rifle or the Browning X-Bolt Stainless routinely punch 3/4-inch groups with no exotic gunsmithing. Recoil sits in that sweet spot closer to a .270 than a 7mm Magnum. Easy to shoot. Serious reach. Efficiency is another win. The .280 burns powder clean, stretches barrel life longer than most Magnums, and keeps 700-yard shots straight forward with nothing more than a duplex reticle. Plenty of elk hunters have proven it, running 150 grain Barnes TSX bullets just under 3,000 feet per second and dropping bulls at 450 yards. So why didn't it catch on? Remington made two bad moves. First, they launched it in semi-autos. Second, they tried to rename it 7mm Express, right as the 7mm Remington Magnum hit shelves and stole the spotlight. But shooters who know. 60 grains of slow powder behind a bonded 150 puts you in the go anywhere, do anything category. Whitetails at 80, antelope at 400. Hold steady, squeeze, done. The .280 Remington is still the real middle ground between range and recoil. Every time a Nosler 48 rifle lays down a cloverleaf, you realize this cartridge never should have been labeled an underdog. Number 5. 6mm Remington. Back in 1955, Remington tried to one-up the .243 Winchester. They called it the .244 Remington, but with a 1 in 12 twist, it couldn't stabilize heavier bullets, and people quickly wrote it off as just a varmint round. By 1963, they fixed the twist to 1 in 9 and rebranded it as the 6mm Remington. Problem was, the early reputation had already stuck. Factory 100-grain soft points leave the barrel at 3,100 feet per second, more than enough to anchor a coyote past 500 yards. Load up a 105-grain Hornady AMAX with a ballistic coefficient around .500, and you get a flatter arc and more authority downrange. Custom 24-inch rigs with long mags can push 85-grain partitions past 3,400. That makes for laser-straight flight paths on light game. And with proper bedding, rifles like the Remington 700 Varmint or a rebarreled Ruger 77 often group under half MOA. Recoil stays even lighter than a .243 Winchester, yet the 6mm keeps more energy past the 300-yard mark. That means quicker follow-ups and more confidence behind the trigger. Prairie dog hunters love the generous free bore. It keeps pressures safe even at max velocity. Whitetail hunters respect the 100-grain partition. It opens cleanly at 2,900 feet per second, holds together, and doesn't wreck meat. Coyotes hit with a 75-grain VMAX, they just collapse. The real charm is versatility. Swap bullets, and one rifle can clear varmints all summer and fill the freezer in November. Number 6. .264 Winchester Magnum. In 1959, Winchester released a new speed demon, the .264 Winchester Magnum. It was chambered in their 26-inch barreled Model 70 Westerner, and it threw a 140-grain Spitzer at 3,200 feet per second. Long-range shooters loved the numbers, but back then, chrome moly barrels couldn't handle the heat. Throat erosion gave the cartridge a bad reputation before shooters had the chance to see what it could really do. Fast forward to modern stainless cut rifled or hammer-forged 5R barrels. Problem solved. Run a 140-grain Berger VLD at 3240, and you've got tight groups at 1,000 yards with less drift than many of today's trendy short magnums. Load a 120-grain Barnes TTSX at 3,300 and mule deer across canyons become point and shoot. Plenty of custom bolt rigs and rebarreled Ruger Hawkeyes are printing 3/8 MOA with that recipe. The long beltless case feeds like butter and burns powder with textbook efficiency. Recoil lands above the 6.5 Creedmoor, but well below a 7mm Magnum. That makes it powerful, but still comfortable for seasoned shooters. From 50 yards out to nearly 400, you're usually working with one holdover point. That's a huge confidence boost in real hunting scenarios. Critics still harp about barrel life, but with today's steel you can expect 1,200 rounds of match-grade accuracy. For a hunter, that's basically a lifetime. Guides in Wyoming still trust it. Plenty of elk have dropped to a 130-grain AccuBond, punching through both lungs at over 500 yards. The .264 Winchester Magnum deserves a second chance. Number 7. .257 Roberts. Take the 7x57 Mauser case, neck it down to 1/4-inch bullets, keep the pressure modest, and you get one of the most pleasant cartridges ever put in the field, the .257 Roberts. Send a 117-grain Sierra Pro Hunter at 3,000 feet per second. It's still trucking along above 2,000 feet per second at 400 yards. With tuned handloads in rifles like the Kimber Hunter or Winchester Model 70 Featherweight, sub-MOA groups are the norm. Recoil is almost nothing, about 9 foot-pounds in a 7-pound rifle, light enough that new shooters can stay in the glass and spot their own impacts. But don't mistake it for soft. The Roberts has cleanly handled antelope, axis deer, and even cow elk. All it asks is that you put the bullet where it belongs. The design itself is part of the magic. It headspaces off the shoulder, which keeps bullet jump consistent. Cases are naturally concentric, so accuracy comes easy. Coyote hunters often run 100-grain partitions. They break shoulders and exit without tearing up hides. It's quiet enough that the next dog in the pack might hang around, giving you another shot. Factory ammo can be hit or miss, but handloaders love how forgiving it is. Form brass easily, burn powder efficiently, and watch it group tight. In a world obsessed with 6.5s, the Roberts quietly delivers everything they promise: mild recoil, deadly accuracy, and practical hunting performance. It doesn't brag. It just keeps punching cloverleafs at 100 and dropping game in the field. Number 8. 2506 Remington. Start with the 30-06 case. Neck it down to quarter bore, and you've got the 2506 Remington. Flat, fast, and still one of the hardest-hitting light recoiling cartridges out there. Run a 110-grain Nosler AccuBond at just over 3,080 feet per second. Zero it at 200 yards, and your hold is simple. Less than 2 inches high at 100, about 6 inches low at 300. That makes antelope in wide-open country a point-and-shoot problem. Even a factory Remington 700 ADL can stack half MOA once you bed the action and clean up the trigger pull. Drop in a custom barrel, and groups get even tighter. Despite the speed, recoil stays closer to a .243 Winchester than any Magnum. You can spot your own hits, stay in the scope, and make follow-ups quick. On Black Bear, a 115-grain partition at 3,000 feet per second drives through shoulder and spine. On Varmints, a 75-grain VMAX vaporizes prairie dogs at 350 yards with pure shock effect. Now, the trade-off. Past 600 yards, wind drift creeps in, more than the high BC 6.5s. But inside that envelope, the 2506 holds more speed, more energy, and flatter flight than most competitors. And compared to the 257 Weatherby, it doesn't torch barrels nearly as fast. That means more range time and longer life from your rifle. Ruger, Browning, Savage, plenty of bolt guns still roll off the line in this chambering. Handloaders love it too. That roomy parent case plays well with powders across the burn chart. Sheep hunters in Alaska's Brooks Range often carry sub-7-pound rifles in 2506. One well-placed shot drops a doll ram without punishing the shooter and without dialing turrets in freezing wind. If you want Magnum-level reach without Magnum-level recoil or Magnum-level barrel wear, this round punches above its weight every single time. Number 9. 6.5 by 55 Swedish Mauser. Back in 1894, the Swedes introduced the 6.5 by 55 mm Mauser. More than a century later, it still hangs with modern 6.5s like the Creedmoor. The secret is balance. Everything about it, from brass elasticity to case taper to bullet design, works in harmony. It's not flashy, it's just efficient. Compared to the Creedmoor, the Swede runs lower chamber pressure. That means longer barrel life. It also means your brass lasts through more reloads. Load a 140-grain Hornady ELDX at 2,700 feet per second. Even a stock Tikka T3 or a clean Mauser action can hold half MOA all day. Step up to a 155-grain Lapua Mega at 2560. That's the same bullet Scandinavian hunters have used for decades to drop moose clean. Recoil is straight back and manageable, perfect for new shooters learning trigger discipline. The case itself has an 8-degree shoulder and long neck. That geometry feeds smooth from a standard box mag and lets you seat long bullets without pressure spikes. On paper, energy past 500 yards still clears 1,600 foot-pounds. Wind drift is nearly identical to Creedmoor, but the Swede gets there by mass and momentum, not just BC numbers. From tight Scandinavian timber to open Scottish hills, this round has anchored heavy game for over 100 years. Modern rifles like the Sauer 100 or the Howa 1500 give it fresh life with better steel and better optics. Handloaders love the generous throat. It lets you run heavy for caliber bullets seated long, making use of all that case capacity. And the legacy isn't just hunting. Collectors still run Swedish Mauser bolt guns in vintage military matches, ringing steel at 1,000 yards with surplus ammo older than your grandfather. A cartridge doesn't last this long out of nostalgia. It lasts because it works. The 6.5 by 55 Swede isn't just history. It's proof that balance and efficiency never go out of style.